Welcome to the 4D Combatives Firearms and Defense Network in Tampa, Florida, with hosts Lane Andrews and Nick DiMatteo. On this podcast, we discuss firearms-related topics, including legal, tactical, concealed carry, as well as weapon and product reviews. We also discuss self-defense training as it relates to concealed carry. Our first sponsor is South Tampa Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. Learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts in a family-friendly environment from some of Tampa's best martial artists. Check them out at SouthTampaJiu-Jitsu.com. Our next sponsor is Nopiate Topical Pain Ointment, the toughest topical pain reliever for the combat athlete. Get back on the grind with Nopiate Pain Relief, found only at www.nopiate.com. That's NOPIATE.com. Next episode, starting now.
All right, welcome to the 4D Combatives and Defense Network podcast. Today I'm here with Ariel Siegelman, who's a Special Forces operator for the Israeli military. And we're going to talk about carrying with a bullet in the chamber or carrying without a bullet in the chamber. But first, I'm going to have Ariel introduce himself, and then we'll continue the conversation from there. Go ahead, Ariel.
Okay, my name is Ariel Siegelman. I grew up in the United States of America, and I moved to Israel when I was in my early 20s. I joined the Israeli army. I was in a special unit. I was in Sayeret Tzanchanim. I was in the counterterrorism part of the unit, so we did a lot of operations, got a good amount of real-life experience. And then after my full-time service, I started working as both an instructor for the Israeli government. So I'm a certified combat instructor, both in hand-to-hand combat, like Krav Maga is what it's known as well as firearms. So that's why I think you asked me to come and talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've done some training with Ariel, and I think he is one of the best communicators of not only what the Israeli military does, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about how the Israeli military carries, why they carry, and we're talking primarily pistol carry here, why they carry without a bullet in the chamber. And every place I go, I just see things that I know from training with Ariel and a few other members of the Israeli Special Forces that aren't true or that are misunderstood. And I think Ariel does the best job of kind of breaking those down and making them understandable for most Americans, given the fact that he is an American citizen as well. Ariel, so can you talk a little bit about the Israeli military structure, and then on top of that, kind of where you fit in that picture?
Sure. First, before I get to that, let me just say that we're saying the word military here a lot, and it's important to clarify and make the distinction that the security community in Israel is really a compilation, obviously, of the law enforcement community. There's a whole very elaborate security community, different kinds of government agencies that are working around the clock, just like the military is. And so it's a compilation. What we're talking about today is kind of the technical and tactical side of using a weapon and the theory behind it for that greater security apparatus in Israel.
Well, that's one thing that's interesting to me too about Israel and the military structure or complex, if you will, because it does include law enforcement, right? Because law enforcement is trained kind of under a central unit, or are they completely separate from the military, or how does that really work? It's a little confusing.
Yeah, so Israel is not nearly, it's not based on the same kind of system as the United States. Let's say it like that, first of all. So, for instance, in the United States, the military does not operate inside of the U.S. borders. It's a big difference in Israel is that the military is there. It's not actually a military. Right. Let me say it as kind of a crazy statement that I don't think of the Israeli military as a military in terms of comparing it to the American military, certainly. Here you've got the Posse Combatives. You can't operate inside the borders. In Israel, you've got the Israel Defense Force. The military, in other words, is not a military. It's a defense force that is there to protect the population and there to protect the country, both inside and outside of the borders. Sometimes you can find yourself as a soldier doing something that would very much be a law enforcement type operation in the United States. So I think of the Israeli army actually as a militia.
Right.
It's pretty much made up of everybody in the society.
Right.
After you finish your full-time service, I've got my boots in my bag and my guns in the base, and like I know that I can get a phone call and I'm going to go to war.
Right.
And I'm going to go to war, and it's going to be 1 hour potentially from my home.
Right.
So that's very different, obviously, than a lot of the military experience, the soldiers' experience in the United States, where you get called and you know that it's like in some foreign, distant land that you've never even heard of before.
Right. Right. And you are currently a reservist, and you run your own security business.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, and you served from what years did you serve as? We use the term active duty, versus like a reservist. It's two separate things, but
sure. So it's hard for me when people ask me like, well, when did you serve from? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm still serving.
You're still serving. Yeah,
I'm still serving my country right now as we're speaking about this. This is service to my country.
Yes.
So yeah, I joined the Army in March of 2003. My full-time service, I was done in the summer of 2005. And then, I think 2005, yeah. And then I was in the war in Gaza in 2009. Yep. I've been in many difficult operations post quote-unquote military service.
Right.
And, we do a lot of putting on our uniform and going out.
You're a very active reservist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I know this has changed since the war and, the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. More reservists here are getting called up. But
sure.
From knowing you and hanging out with you, it seems like you kind of get called on quite frequently. And if there is a war, there's really no question. Like, there's not enough reservists to say, like, okay, you guys are going, you aren't. But most of you go if called upon, right?
Well, certainly more. So here's the interesting thing about the Israeli structure. People ask me like, oh, well, if there's a war, you have to go? Do you have to go? And it boggles my mind to think about it in those terms, because in Israel myself, the guys I serve with, we look at it as a great merit. That if I were to call and say like, oh, hey guys, I can't make it, they'd be like, okay, and they'll do it without me.
Yeah.
And that's really the concept, is like with what you have, you're gonna win. And we say that in the it's a saying in Hebrew. This is what we've got, and with this, we're gonna win.
Right.
And so if I say I can't come, there's no question. No problem. I go and I pay to go. I will buy my own ticket to go to war, because that is a tremendous merit for me to go serve and protect my own people.
Right. Right.
When I put on a uniform, in other words, and this is a big difference. In America, I see guys put on a uniform and I hear them talk about how the uniform has meaning. Right. The uniform, I look at the shiny buttons and I have shiny medals and shiny ribbons, and it means something.
Right.
Man, in Israel, my uniform is a fucking piece of fabric.
Yeah.
It's green fabric.
Right.
I am the man that wears this uniform, and I make the uniform great.
Right.
And so whether I have a green pair of pants on or a blue pair of pants or a pair of shorts and sandals, I'm a fucking warrior.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what I'm wearing.
You're gonna do what you need to do. And I think that's important, because I see some pictures of the Israeli military guys, and everybody's wearing that kind of what we would call Ranger green.
Right.
And it's not flashy, and it's not like a camo for stealth missions and a camo for desert missions, and a special kind of camo when you're operating near the water or whatever else.
Right.
It's very simple and plain. And getting to know some of the Israelis, I really appreciate that, because I think sometimes it's easy to overcomplicate things.
Mm-hmm.
And and if you get too comfortable with needing a certain thing or having a certain thing to win, then it inhibits your mindset. And I think one of the beautiful things about the Israelis is the the ability to simplify things.
Yeah.
You know, and get to the point and just focus on the objective, which is winning. So I would love to have you on later and talk a little bit more about that in the difference in the mind. We could probably do a whole podcast around that.
Yeah.
Let's go real quick. Where you serve. So you're in every brigade in Israel has a special forces unit attached to it.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Every infantry brigade, I should say.
Every infantry brigade, right?
Combat, yeah.
So, and there's also a special forces unit in the Air Force, in the Navy.
There are a few. There are a few that are kind of overarching. They don't answer to a brigade. They answer maybe directly to even the Prime Minister's office.
Right.
They answer, so like the Naval Commando Unit answers, they get their orders directly from the head of the Navy, not from some other brigade. So that's the value also in just kind of the chain of command in those units versus my unit got our missions down the chain of command through the Paratrooper Brigade.
Through the Paratrooper Brigade. And the Paratrooper Brigade, from what I hear, is it's kind of like one of the higher end brigades to begin with, right? Or do you guys even say that? But I mean,
we like to think so.
You get some special status being a
for sure. We got red boots when we wear uniforms.
That's flashy. That's a little flashy for the Israeli military.
So cool.
Yeah, and you get a red beret too, right?
Yeah, when you earn it.
Okay, man. It's not urban camo, but it's a start for you guys.
That's it, man. That's it.
So within that Paratrooper Brigade, you were in a special forces unit.
Yeah. It was called Sayeret Tzanchanim. So Sayeret just means special forces, so to speak.
Yep. And
Tzanchanim means paratroopers.
Right.
So there are other special units that are kind of quasi-connected to the paratroopers, like Duvdevan and Maglan. And everybody has their own specialty. And, it's one of the beautiful things I think about the Israeli military also is that it's such a small country, such a small nation, and the army therefore is pretty small in numbers, but I think they do a really, really good job of recognizing that the value of human beings is if you can figure out what people are good at and you can put them in what they're good at, then you're just going to have a really high quality team. Right. So you're much better off, from my experience, if you're going to go to war, you are much better off giving missions to 1,000 special soldiers than you are having 100,000 regular guys who don't know how to do anything. Right.
Okay, that's interesting. That's cool. All right. So we talked about the Israeli military a little bit. We talked a little bit about your background. Let's jump into what's kind of known as Israeli carry, even though the Israelis weren't the first to do it, and they certainly weren't like the last to do it either, right? I mean, I think the majority of military, I could be wrong here, but the majority of military and police forces throughout the world carry in what most Americans call Condition 3, what we're going to refer to today as bullet not in the chamber, right? So you have a magazine loaded into the weapon, but there's no live round in the chamber. So if you squeeze the trigger, there should be, no shot fired. Yeah, versus
you have to chamber the weapon in order to make it function. Yeah.
Versus the way most people carry in North America, which is bullet inside the chamber. Yeah. Sometimes with the safety on, safety off. Right.
Yeah, and the weapon hot.
Yeah. The weapon. Right. So people would refer to it kind of a bullet in the chamber as a hot weapon, whereas bullet outside of the chamber is a cold weapon.
Sure.
So, and that's really intrigued me since I started carrying concealed and since I got into firearms, because I saw firearms as an extension of my martial arts training. I trained martial arts forever, and I always kind of thought they were a separate thing. That you either you have a gun or you know how to fight.
Right.
And you know what I'm saying? And that's, to me now, that's really stupid. But I still think there's a lot of people out there that kind of think that, well, if I can't fight, then I'll carry a weapon.
Or let me say it even differently. I've heard a lot of guys who are in terrible shape, who have never trained in martial arts, say, why would I learn how to punch? Why would I learn how to do jiu-jitsu? I got a gun.
Right. I've heard that too.
And and those are the guys who are going to get their asses kicked when it actually happens.
And it's very dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah, and the odds of them getting their weapon taken away is very high if they don't have any sort of martial arts training, and all of those things. But anyway, but what intrigued me about weapons was when I saw it as an extension of my martial arts training,
Sure.
not as something totally separate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, well, that intrigues me. And then I met you through our mutual friend Anthony Kuntz.
Yeah.
And started training in the Israeli system,
mm-hmm.
which for me was a very palatable system because, quite honestly, I don't disagree with people who necessarily carry with a bullet in the chamber. I think, there's a lot of people out there very, very qualified to do that, and they've trained like that, and they've got thousands of reps like that, and it's fine that they do it. Where I get a little frustrated, where I get very frustrated, I'll say, is people giving me a hard time about not carrying with the bullet in the chamber.
Sure.
Because they're looking at it as if I'm in a gunfight, not that, you know what, I have kids at home. I was a former professional fighter, so I've kind of been hit in the head a lot, and my memory lapses sometimes, So
Right.
it's possible that I could leave my weapon out, and I don't want my weapon in a condition where my kids could possibly use it, and that's only one concern that I have. But we could kind of go down like that kids safety rabbit hole, but I want you to talk about first the Israeli military, because I think there's a lot of issues when it comes to why, and a lot of myths out there about when it comes to why the Israeli military carries the way they carry and continue to kind of carry and push that Condition 3 or no bullet in the chamber philosophy.
Yeah. So first of all, when I started thinking about this, I started really trying to identify what it was that people were saying their reasoning was for carrying a bullet in the chamber. Because, like you said, I mean, we come from a society where we see combat all the time. Now, when I see somebody often I see people say to me, or hear people say to me, wow, yeah, the Israelis are really good at what they do. And I believe that's true. I mean, I've seen it on the ground. Then they'll say, oh, carrying a bullet in the chamber is the only way to do it, and if you're not carrying a bullet in the chamber, it means you don't know how to use a gun, and it means that your gun is just a rock, and then you should just go home and go lock yourself in the closet.
Right.
So that doesn't make sense to me. So basically what you see is that there is a system that's a legitimate system that is used in a place where there's a lot of combat, there's a lot of conflict, we shoot a lot of people. Right. And so this is the way we do it. There's probably something to learn from it.
Yeah.
Now, when somebody has a different way of doing something, and I've operated all over the world. I've worked with special forces. Thank God I've had the opportunity to work with really talented people in many, many different places. And they do things differently in some places. My first question is, why? Right? And I've learned a lot by asking that question. And when somebody says to me, the only way to carry your gun is with a bullet in the chamber, I say, really? Okay, well, on what basis? Because obviously that's not true. I mean, it's not the only way. I can carry my gun in a lot of different ways. Yeah. So there may be a reason to carry it in my backpack with no, I don't know. There's depends on the situation, and it depends on the environment, and it depends on. So that's the way we look at it. We look at it as a very scientific thing. Anything about combat is really science in Israel. Now, you have a question?
Yeah. So is every unit, and this kind of gets confusing, at least to me sometimes. So every unit in the Israeli military carries without a bullet in the chamber?
No.
Okay.
No. The way that we look at it is like this. First of all, it's important to note that when we're talking about pistols, we're talking about a weapon that is, if we're speaking from a military perspective, a pistol is almost always a secondary weapon.
Right.
Because I've got my rifle.
Right.
Okay? Now, the only forces in the Israeli military that carry a pistol are special forces.
Right.
Okay? You don't just get a pistol because you're a soldier.
Okay.
The only guys you'll ever see carrying a pistol are in a Special Forces unit.
Right.
Typically, that's their secondary weapon. So now it makes much more sense that you would not have a bullet in the chamber because it's your secondary weapon. Things really went bad if you actually have to go to that pistol.
Right.
That also means, by the way, that you're only seeing guys carrying a pistol who are extremely well trained.
Yes.
So this concept that like, oh, well, the reason they're carrying with no bullet in the chamber is because they have no training. That's complete bullshit.
Right. It's not everybody who joins the army, which every citizen in Israel is required to join the army, that gets that pistol training.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
talking about guys who are extremely well trained to an extent that most people who would say these kinds of things don't even know that this level of training is even possible.
Right.
That's the level of training we're talking about.
Right. Right. And I've seen the level of competency firsthand, which is what, which is part of what drives me to pursue the system, because I think it's a simple system, simple yet complex, but it's broken down very simply, but it's something that, like anything else, that you have to train. Yeah.
So let's talk about why that. So you asked me the question a few minutes ago, like, does every soldier, does every policeman, does every security officer carry without a bullet in the chamber? And my answer was no.
Right.
Let me expand on that.
Yes, please.
Why, when a guy says to me, you only should carry your gun with a bullet in the chamber, and I say, why? So what is the reason? You tell me, Lane. What's the reason to carry with a bullet in the chamber? What does it offer me?
I think the argument would be a little quicker on the draw, quicker to get a shot off. You don't have
I don't have
to add one more layer to drawing your weapon.
I reduce exactly. I reduce one step in the process of being able to shoot somebody.
Right.
Now, why do I carry a gun? Why do I carry a gun at all?
Well, I know your answer because I've been around you enough. But let me give the answer I would have given like prior to knowing you. To potentially protect myself, to protect my family, and I think this is the answer most people would give. Yeah. And most people who carry a firearm, they want to carry it for those reasons. I feel
I'm supportive of all those things. I think that it's good to protect yourself. I think it's good to protect your family. I think it's good to protect your community, your nation. Those are all good things. Let me say it a little bit differently, though. The reason to carry a gun is in order to reduce the risk in your environment. Mm-hmm. By looking at it that way and by speaking it that way, I now must change my paradigm to consistently, always, 100% of my waking hours, I must be doing a risk assessment.
Yeah.
It is not logical. It is not appropriate for me to have a gun. And let's just take a step back. What is a gun? What was a gun made for? A gun was made to kill people. Okay, let's just cut this baloney out of the way of the politics and the emotion. I'm always surprised in this country because the whole issue with guns is so emotional and so political. And, there's all these people who are like, oh my God, nobody should have a gun. Guns are terrible. Right. And then there's other people who are like, by golly, everybody should have a gun and they should have 50 guns. And man, I'm happy for people to have guns. And if you don't want to have a gun, you don't have to. And if you want to have a gun, great, have one. But obviously, there's a lot of people in the middle, too, who are like, I don't know. Should people have guns? Should people...
Yeah, you get extremists driving an agenda, though, right, on either side.
But then the guy, a lot of times I hear these people say, well, guns are for sport, and guns are for hunting, and guns are for... Those are all fine things. But let's just be honest and say what they're for. Guns were made to kill people.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
Because there are some people that in order to protect our society and in order to protect ourselves and our families, we can do it better by using guns.
Yes.
Against really evil people, it's just necessary in today's world. I'm in agreement. Now, I have a gun in order to reduce the risk in the environment. By looking at it that way, I have to look at my gun and say, is my gun right now in its current situation reducing the risk in this environment or increasing the risk in this environment? Is it more dangerous or is it less dangerous for me to have this device that was made to kill people in a current situation where I only have to do one motion to make it fire and potentially kill somebody, or to do two? If I have to do two motions, it's in a safer situation, right?
Right.
So now let's take it one step forward. If I was to be in a place where I'm issuing a high risk warrant, or if I was going into Gaza,
right,
then I know that without having a bullet in the chamber, I am increasing the risk in the environment to myself and to the people around me.
Right.
Therefore, I have a bullet in the chamber.
Right.
If I am sitting eating breakfast with my children in my living room, for me to have a bullet in the chamber would probably be increasing the risk in the environment. Therefore, I do not have a bullet in the chamber.
Right.
So that's the long answer of, do Israelis operate with a bullet in the chamber or not?
Well,
the answer is yes and no.
Yeah. Here's what some people would say to argue against operating in two conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you get the muscle memory and the repetition in one condition.
Sure.
And then what if what if you don't have a bullet in the chamber and you go to shoot and nothing happens? Well, of course you got to fix the jam and all that stuff too, but those are precious. Yeah. So that would kind of be the argument against kind of operating both ways.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So two answers. One is yes, train much more.
Yeah.
The other answer is, worst case scenario, if you train without a bullet in the chamber, and right now you have a bullet in the chamber, and you have to use your gun, and you come out and you chamber your weapon because it's just rote repetition, muscle memory. Worst case scenario, you just expended one good round, now you're going to shoot.
Yep.
Now, people will talk about how but it takes so much more time. Look, if anybody listening to this, if you are unable to pull your weapon with a bullet in the chamber and get your first round on target in under 2 seconds, with all due respect, you shouldn't even be having the conversation.
Right.
So from the Israeli perspective, the standard for an operator is you must be able, from a concealed position,
right, to
draw your weapon that does not have a bullet in the chamber, chamber it, and get your first round on target in 1.2 seconds.
Yes. And that's concealed carry. So that's pulling up the shirt, which is another reason I like training with you guys, because I feel like your training is more adequate for concealed carry than a lot of other military style training, because a lot of times they're using an outside the waistband holster or maybe some sort of leg system where they get to their weapon in an entirely different way. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Israelis that I've trained with, it's always, hey, your weapon's concealed, you're drawing from concealment. So it's very practical from a concealed carry licensed person from their standpoint, in a civilian dealing with counterterrorism, that you're going to be concealed. Yeah. The other reason I like it is, of course, you guys' expertise in the counterterrorism, in counterterrorism in general, because that's something that really speaks to me, having, 4 kids and a wife out at the mall, and those types of things. But
no, I think that and I think what you're saying is really important, because even from the perspective, you're not probably going to find yourself, in a stack operating against a terrorist cell.
Right.
But if you learn the methods that have proven to work, and we're not talking about theory here, we're talking about actual proof and continual testing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. So if you know those kind of methods and something does go down in the mall, you have a much higher likelihood of being able to protect yourself and your family and the other people around you.
Yeah. And I'd also say, kind of going back to the, kind of increasing the risk versus decreasing the risk in the environment, that I know that there are some people who will carry hot when they're on the street, right? So when they leave their house, they'll have a cold firearm, they'll put a bullet in the chamber, and holster it, and then go out. Right. But they may not have a bullet in the chamber while they're at their house for the same reasons I don't. Right. Yeah. Kids and whatever else that reason might be.
Sure.
And my thought to them is, well, what if you're in your house and you have to grab your weapon? Do you think you're going to remember to rack it then, unless you've done the training for not only how to rack it, but how to rack it proficiently and make sure that there is a round in the chamber and not short stroke it and doing all of those things. Wouldn't it be good to have some training in learning how to rack that firearm and get it, ready to fire in short order if you had to?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I also think that walking around, kind of making it a standard that I'm treating my life as if by going to the grocery store I'm in a combat situation, and the risk is so high of me meeting a person who it's now going to become a life and death situation. I just think that's unrealistic.
Right.
And I think that we have to expel Hollywood from our brains.
100%.
I mean, we're not living in a movie, guys.
Yeah.
And there's a critical difference between going into an actual dangerous zone and going into Kroger.
Right.
And so, or sitting at my dinner table. So, yeah, I'm not saying that it can't happen. What I am saying is this, though. I could show you thousands of videos on YouTube of guys shooting themselves in the foot because they were carrying a round in the chamber. Yeah. Now, out of all the guys who were shooting themselves because they're carrying a bullet in the chamber, and they'll patch it up, and tomorrow they'll carry a bullet in the chamber, and it's amazing to me. Right. They're not learning from these things. So there's a higher likelihood of somebody having an accidental discharge when they are carrying a pistol with a round in the chamber. A much higher likelihood, at least in the Israeli method. I only have a round in the chamber typically when my barrel is facing my target. So even if I had an accidental discharge, it's going to go in the right direction at least.
Right.
I think that we have to be okay with knowing that, like, you know what? I probably will not have to get into a gunfight today.
Yep.
But you know what else? I still carry my gun when I take out the trash.
Yeah.
Because if I do get into a situation where I need to use my gun, I don't want to run inside and go get it.
Right.
I've got it on me.
Right.
I pull it out, I cock it, and I shoot the guy if I have to. But I'm not looking for an opportunity to shoot people, and I'm definitely not. I definitely want to remember that statistically, I need to be careful about safety. Safety is a big issue.
Right.
A huge issue when you're dealing with a tool.
Safety is the most important issue when you're dealing with a tool. That was designed, as you said, to kill people.
Yeah.
Right? Because that means it can also kill you or kill someone you love.
That's right.
I think that's great. I was going to ask a question and I lost it for a second. What do you, in terms of, okay, so let's get to some of the myths about why Israelis started carrying this way and then why the military still does that today.
Yeah. So, I'm not 100% sure how the system developed regarding the history of the system. And I've read articles and kind of I've heard people talk about how, it was because in Israel they had a bunch of, just like a pile of weapons that came from all different places and nobody really had any training. And so they sort of had to standardize this system that would just sort of work for all these different kinds of guns and, and for people who didn't really know how to do anything. And like you said, then that really begs the question of, well, what about today? Because today the pistol is, typically we use a Glock pistol. Sometimes you see a SIG, sometimes you see an FN, but they're all pretty good pistols. I don't think anybody today would say that the Israelis don't know what they're doing, and that's why they're continuing.
Right. They just haven't kept up with the time because they don't understand that an auto
we don't know how guns work. We're not smart enough to upgrade our capabilities, and so the reason that we do it today is because of what I already said. I mean, I know for a fact that we look at the system, and one of the beautiful things about the Israeli system is that pretty much on a moment-to-moment basis, I can tell you this: last night there were multiple real-life operations that happened in and around Israel. By the Israeli army, by the Israeli police, by the Israeli security services, probably all over the world. Every time we go on an operation, we have a very careful after-action report that is quite in depth, and we talk about how can we do it better.
Right.
And so we maintain this operating methodology because we believe that it's the best way to do it, not because we're afraid to change the way we do things. We change the way we do things all the time.
Right.
It's because we have a relationship with risk. We don't have a relationship with our guns. Our guns are just a tool.
Right.
So I saw some guy on some blog. Somebody asked about the carrying without a bullet in the chamber. Some answer that came back was, if you're not carrying with a bullet in the chamber, your gun is just a hammer and it's worthless. Well, I got news for you. Yes, that's true. Without a bullet in the chamber, my gun is just a hammer. But I know how to fight with a fucking hammer.
Right.
And I know how to fight with a gun.
Right.
And so sometimes you need to hit somebody with a hammer, and at close range, I see these videos that you showed me beforehand, and the guy was critiquing these videos of like, look at this, at close range, this guy without a bullet in the chamber. First of all, he doesn't know the guy doesn't have a bullet in the chamber.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody's wrestling around, some guy pulls a gun, he doesn't get to shoot the guy.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
If whether you have a bullet in the chamber or not, this is a key example of somebody not knowing how to analyze what they're looking at.
Right.
They've got data, they don't know how to analyze it.
Yeah, and just for you people listening, the videos that we're referencing are the active self-protection videos. And I watch a lot of his videos. I think he does a really good job of breaking down certain things. But I do get a little annoyed about the non-bullet in the chamber videos that he does, just because he's not speaking from a position of experience or understanding the system. Another common thing that I think was in the video and that you hear on the blogs is you never rely on having two hands to get your weapon ready to use.
We don't rely on that either. I can chamber my weapon on the side of your fucking head.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of goes back, and you mentioned this earlier, I got a hammer. It's like most of the time, if you're thinking about the different threats out there to a civilian concealed carry, right? There's the criminal threat, which is maybe an ambush style attack up close.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have the skills to fight to your weapon and not get that weapon taken away. Because most...
And man, that's true whether you have a bullet in the chamber or not.
Yes.
And what this shows, by the way, what those videos showed that I saw was not the need to have a bullet in the chamber. It shows the need to learn how to create distance so you can use your weapon,
right,
whether you have a bullet in the chamber or not.
Right. No, I 100% agree. And when you think about a criminal threat, I don't think most criminals, look at, say, somebody 3 times bigger than them walking down the street and say, you know what, that looks like a pretty good victim. Mm-hmm. Unless there's some sort of celebrity or somebody with a lot of jewelry on it that makes the risk worth the reward. But, criminals are predators. Predators don't, they don't seek other predators to eat. They go after what they perceive as prey, right? Somebody who's vulnerable in the moment. So typically, if you don't have any hand-to-hand skills or the ability to create distance, I would say drawing your gun when somebody's engaged in like close physical contact with you, a grappling match or whatever, is a bad idea, because the odds of you getting that weapon taken away and used against you are very, very high if you don't have the skills to create the proper distance to use it.
Most people don't realize, but a gun at touching distance, if it's in your hand, is not a good thing. Right? Like, it's not... I would rather have the gun in my hand, obviously, than you have the gun in your hand if we're in this altercation.
Right.
But I have a severe disadvantage being at a touching distance from you when the gun's in my hand.
Yes.
I have to create distance so that I can use my weapon.
Right.
Or I use my weapon at that distance as a hammer.
Right.
And I smash you with it in order to create distance to shoot you.
In order to create distance to shoot you. Yeah. That's a really good point, because the other... The blog that you referred to earlier is the link that I sent you. And one of the other comments on there was, you better not get in a grappling match in condition 3 or without a bullet in the chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And,
you shouldn't get in a grappling match with a gun in your hand anyway.
Yeah.
That you
but let's say you do. Let's say you trip over a curb,
fine.
You get thrown down, you've got somebody who's more physical than you. I call bullshit on that too, because when it comes to grappling, that's where I'm the expert.
Yeah.
Right. And I would much rather, like, first of all, if you're in a grappling match and somebody takes you to the ground with your weapon, if they took you to the ground, they're probably bigger and stronger than you anyway.
Probably.
Again, if you draw your weapon, they're going to take that weapon away.
Potentially.
And now they're only a trigger pull away from shooting you.
Mm-hmm.
Versus maybe they don't know anything about guns. Maybe they don't know that if they pull the trigger and it doesn't go off, they need to slap and rack. But either way, it buys you more time. It doesn't make, and not to mention, if you're going to use that weapon, you shouldn't be using it on the ground unless you're completely desperate. You should be getting up, creating space, and
I think we can go through an entire podcast easily on just proper tactical thought at close distance.
Right.
And again, we have a lot of experience in that area, in real life experience, written in real blood.
Right.
And I don't know that we want to walk down that road right now.
But I don't want to get too specific.
But for sure, just an intro to that thought process is that if you're in touching distance of somebody, and it's a fight to the death kind of a thing. Right. One of the first things that people typically do is they go for their gun, and it's the wrong thing to do.
Right.
You must go hands-on if you're at a hands-on distance before you go to your gun. You do not want to engage firearms at that kind of a distance because it creates disadvantages that you have to know how to deal with if you got a gun in your hand. Right. And you should know how to deal with it. It's like you said at the very beginning, the reason that you started learning about firearms is because you realized that like the ninja of 1,000 years ago was the guy who knew how to use little metal stars and knives and nunchucks and whatever else.
Today, he knew how to use the most modern weapon at the time. He wasn't the guy who caught the bullet with his teeth.
No.
Which is what I grew up on, and I'm sure you grew up on some of those movies too. That wasn't what he was. He was the cutting edge warrior of his time.
Yeah. And today the ninja, so to speak, is the guy who understands like you said, the weapons of our time, and guns are there. And so if you know how a gun works, and if you know how grappling works, and if you know how striking works, all those things go in compilation, and you have to know how to do all of those things at close distance to somebody. Yep. And at far distance.
Absolutely. So, and that's kind of dealing with the criminal or kind of a close counter ambush type threat. The other threat is kind of the active killer, active shooter type of threat, which is a very different threat as well. Mm-hmm. And one of my thoughts in carrying Condition 3 is
more. By the way, it's more. That's a terrorist threat. From the Israeli perspective,
it's a terrorist threat.
It's a terrorist threat.
Yeah, whether it's domestic or
here we
from another country. I never get why we. To me, it's still the same. It's all terrorism.
Well, I'll tell you the reason is because in the United States, the government likes to categorize things, and it's a political terrorist, quote unquote, is a political term, which if it's categorized that way, then the government has to do different things than if they can just say it was a criminal act.
Right.
If it was a criminal act, they don't have to put the wheels in motion that they don't want to have to put in motion.
Right.
So,
okay.
But from a tactical perspective and the way that you need to operate against a quote unquote active, they call it active shooter. We don't call it that. We talk about people. It's an active killer because we don't focus on the gun. We focus on the intent of the human being.
Yep.
So,
and I've talked about that a little bit in a few other podcasts with the people running over. There was just another episode the other day of somebody in Germany taking a big truck and smashing through
running people
a bunch
over.
of people. And,
sure.
And of course there's the bomb threat. There's a knife threat. Which knife attacks happen often.
A guy who's stabbing people randomly with a pencil is an active killer. Right. And you operate the same way you would if he's trying to kill people with a gun.
Right. But my point there, no, you're good. In terms of bringing that up is if I'm at the mall and I hear shots fired.
Yeah.
In that situation, it's not like, I think a lot of Americans, they look to Hollywood and they think about the Wild West where everyone's taking 10 paces. You're either drawing at the same time or you're drawing at a disadvantage, and that extra time is critically important. In kind of an active killer situation, I feel like the extra time doesn't really mean anything because I have it, assuming that I'm not the first target that person is shooting at, and likely if I am, they're probably at close range, and it's probably not my best day anyway, you know?
Right.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in the carrying without a bullet in the chamber.
Yeah, from the Israeli perspective, as soon as my weapon comes, if I felt like there was enough threat to reach for my weapon and pull it out of the holster, then I immediately put a bullet in the chamber.
Right.
So if I heard shots fired and screams down on the other side of the mall,
right,
I would obviously tell my kids and my family go that way and out the door, and I would pull my weapon, chamber it, and be running a sprint with my weapon in one hand, weapon parallel to the floor, finger outside of the trigger housing, in order to be safe.
Right.
I watch people also training with. They don't run with a gun.
Right.
Why?
Right.
Now I've taken my gun out, I chamber it, and I'm running toward where I hear the threat. It doesn't, me having a bullet in the chamber in the holster, or not a bullet in the chamber in the holster, is meaningless at that moment.
Right.
Because as soon as it comes into my hand, it's got a bullet in the chamber, and now I'm going to the threat.
Right. Right. So at that point, the risk analysis shifts. You're at the mall. Of course, there are attacks in the mall, but the likelihood of you being at a spot where there's a terrorist attack,
it's nearly zero.
It's nearly zero, right? So you would
happens. It's possible.
Yeah.
It has happened. But for you to experience that, you'd be I was going to say 1 in a million, probably a lot more than that.
Right, right. So it's a very rare circumstance.
Yeah.
So when you're carrying in a mall or something, you're carrying no bullet in the chamber because you're reducing the risk to
my environment,
anyone else around you, to your environment.
Yeah.
And that's not just inside the mall, because people are going to say, well, it's not going to go off in your holster as long as you don't take it. And
how do you know, man? I've watched all these, I've seen pictures. I got a picture of a guy with a hole in his butt.
Yeah.
That, sat down on it and his holster was a little messed up. And you can explain it all day long. They're oh, well, it was my holster got messed up.
Right.
Dude, if my holster gets messed up, I'm not shooting myself in my ass.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point, and again, you're reducing. Okay, so you've got the argument for that already. But there's also the administrative handling of your firearm to think about. Okay, when you take it out at night, are you clearing it? Are you putting it away? Where are you keeping it? You may be administratively handling that firearm later. Mm-hmm. And if you have a chamber in the round, of course, even the best people make mistakes. Man.
Around the chamber, yeah.
So that's a. Did I say a chamber in the round?
Yeah,
I did. Yeah. It sounds like a song.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, a round in the chamber, the best experts to me are the experts who realize they're not immune to mistakes.
Sure.
Therefore, their arrogance and their elitism is more way down here, and they're protecting themselves from the more common mistakes that even somebody who's a firearms enthusiast or expert or somebody who has a lot of experience with a weapon are prone to.
I used to kayak a lot before I went to Israel. I was really into whitewater kayaking, and I noticed that I had a few friends who actually died on rivers. Got stuck under logs and doing.
Right.
I was getting more and more involved in harder and harder whitewater and going on creeks and really cool stuff. Right. I realized that the guys who were typically dying were guys who were doing the hard stuff because they were guys who were really good.
Right.
And they got a little, you get comfortable, man. You get really good. You get comfortable with something. And so then you start telling yourself, man, that rule over there, that's for the little guys.
Right.
That's for the beginners.
Right.
So one of the things that I've always done as an instructor and as an operator and I've been doing this now for 15 years, right? As a professional. I tell people you have to treat yourself like a kindergartner. I don't care if you get to be the #1 expert on planet Earth in tactical firearms use. You should still treat yourself like you're a kindergartner when it comes to safety.
Right.
Because there are moments within the activity of using a firearm, whether it's at the range training or whether it's cleaning it or whether it's operating in a real situation, there are critical points that you can identify that the danger of potentially making a mistake are higher.
Right.
And those are the points that you have to highlight, and you have to put additional controls so that you don't make a mistake.
Right.
Because a mistake with a gun is tragic.
Right.
It causes a tragedy. And
Right.
if you're lucky, somebody just gets injured.
Yeah.
If you're really lucky, you just destroyed some piece of property.
Right.
So yeah, man, I for myself, I even speak to myself when I'm clearing my weapon or when I'm doing dry fire drills in my own home. Man, I take my magazine out. I put it into a closed drawer in the other room from where I'm operating. I put a safety stick, which most Americans don't even know what that is, but there's a stick that we put inside the that slides into the barrel of the weapon to make the weapon actually inert.
Yeah.
And those are things. Why do I do that? What? Because I'm not good at using guns. I'm actually pretty good at using a gun.
Right.
I do that because I know that even though I'm good at using a gun, and even though I have a stamp of approval by the Israeli government and by multiple states for training law enforcement in the United States, that's not enough for me to be confident that I can't possibly make a mistake. I'm a human being, man. I can make a mistake.
Yep.
So I still treat myself like, okay, man, I'm going to go through step 1, step 2, step 3, just like I'm a beginner. And I'm going to make sure that I put the proper controls in the environment. So even if I didn't sleep for 2 days, and even if I didn't eat all day today, and even if I was in a bad mood. You ever notice how when somebody makes a mistake with a gun, they're always 100% sure that it was safe.
Yeah.
They're 100% sure, right?
Yeah.
Nobody ever says, well, yeah, I shot I shot the wall by accident, but I was 85% sure my gun was empty.
Right.
Nobody says that shit.
Right. Or I didn't touch the trigger.
Right, exactly.
It's amazing how many people don't realize they actually touched the trigger.
Yeah.
It's something. There's something about the gun and when it goes off, and your memory, and if you're not super disciplined with the finger, outside of the trigger guard, it can be. It's amazing because I've seen people do that. They accidentally discharge a weapon. Yeah. And they're like, I didn't touch the trigger.
Sure.
There's no way.
No, of course not.
You have to kind of set them down and talk to them.
Let's watch that video. Look at that.
How it works. It's it's because a lot of people are very nervous handling a firearm. Man, so there's that. But then there's the pro too, right?
We're talking the pros make mistakes too, and they make different kinds of mistakes than beginners. Yeah. But we all have to remember that no matter, arrogance, or we can call it something else because arrogance is a negative term in our society, but we can say that, overconfidence or...
but there is a bit of arrogance, overconfidence, whatever it is.
It's easy.
Level of comfort. Sometimes it's just you get comfortable. Right. And you're no longer thinking about it. You're just doing it as if you're driving a car. But all those things do is... one thing that we really pride ourselves in America, well, half the country at least, it really prides themselves in is our right to bear arms. Sure. Right.
I think it's a great thing.
Yep. And when we're in situations where we're increasing the risk in our environment, whether it's to ourselves or others, I think that incidents like that kind of slowly chip away at our right. It gives it gives the opposition a reason to argue against you carrying a firearm.
Absolutely.
Owning a firearm.
Absolutely.
So when we're in common sense situations that tell you, you know what, I don't have to be, cocked and locked here. I don't have to be ready to go.
Man, let's say it like this. If you want to tell me, right? If I'm talking to a guy at the range and he's saying to me, the only way to do it is it goes back to the very beginning of what we were talking about. The only way to do it is with a bullet in the chamber. Yeah. And I say to him, okay, on what basis? Right. Why? Walk me through the logic. No problem. I'm willing to be totally open-minded. Walk me through the logic. And he says, because this happened to me multiple times, by the way.
I believe it. Yeah.
Because that's the way to do it. Because that's what we do.
Right.
Well, that is not a good argument.
Right.
I'm sorry, but like,
Yeah.
I think that in any professional role, in any profession you look at, if you were to talk to a doctor, if you were to talk to a lawyer, if you were to talk to you, we should be looking at ourselves in these terms, looking at a professional way of seeing things, and we should be able to explain weapons use to that degree as well.
Right.
The way to, if you can explain it and you can walk through a logical process, there may be a good reason, but that is not a good reason. If I were to say to you, you should only carry without a bullet in the chamber because that's the way we do it, well, that's stupid.
Right.
That's silly.
Right. And yeah, no, that's a very common answer. And then all the other arguments we kind of went through, and there are more out there, but the incompetency of carrying a firearm, it's just a rock. These are very short, simple answers without really kind of looking into the system. And it's an easy shortcut for people, so they really don't have to put any more thought into how they're carrying, or what they're carrying, or what environments they're carrying in. So,
yeah,
I really appreciate the conversation today. Do you have? First of all, is there anything around the bullet in the chamber that you want to go more in depth with?
Well, let me explain one more little piece of it. So just to clarify something, I want to make sure that it's clear.
And I have something else too.
Okay, cool.
As we're thinking about it.
So when we're again walking back to that issue of like risk and our relationship with risk, and doing a constant and consistent risk analysis of our environment, and knowing that the risk in the environment can change in a moment. So I may be in an environment where having a bullet in the chamber right now would be raising the risk in the environment. And then that same environment, take the issue with my kids, right? I'm sitting at the dinner table with my kids.
Right.
Man, what if somebody kicks down the door and now the environment changed? Now I need to have a bullet in the chamber in order to reduce the risk in the environment.
Right.
So that's possible. What I want to touch on is that by having a bullet, if you look at it from, let's say, if you can grade it with math for a moment, and you can say that from a scale from 1 to 5, from a tactical perspective, from an operational perspective, having a bullet in the chamber makes my weapon much more capable of operating, right? I'm more capable of being an operator when I have a bullet in the chamber.
Right.
However, the safety of the weapon itself is, so like let's say that that's a 5, right? My operational capability if I have a bullet in the chamber is a 5.
Right.
Whereas my safety at that moment is like a 2 or maybe even a 1.
Right.
Okay.
Right. In order of priority.
Yeah,
right.
Like, I've reduced the safety of the weapon because it's got a high operational capability. So if I have a magazine in the weapon, but I have no bullet in the chamber, my operational capability is probably about a 3.
Right.
And my safety is about a 4.
Right.
I would say, right? Because like I can't really shoot somebody right now,
right.
so it's a pretty high safety.
Right.
But the operational capability is also maybe a 3 or even a 4.
Right.
Because I can so quickly switch the situation of the weapon and put a bullet in the chamber and make it operational.
Right.
So that's a different way of looking at why we choose to generally go with a bullet out of the chamber in the Israeli concept.
So the Israeli, you mean they choose? You mean they're just not behind the times? Like, I say that very sarcastically, but
right.
I think that some people out there just think that this is tradition. This is the way that you've always done it, so that's the way you continue to do it, and that we've never really asked the question. Well, other places carry with a bullet in the chamber.
Yeah, because
why shouldn't we as well? Like, what's the argument for and against, and why does the military continue to emphasize the Condition 3 position for a pistol?
Well, it's not just for a pistol. When I walk around with my rifle,
your rifle, yes,
I also don't have a bullet in the chamber unless I'm going in on a mission, and then I put a bullet into the chamber.
Right.
So, it's funny that you talked about like tradition and about maybe that's the reason we do it because it's like just what we've always done.
Yep.
So if there's one thing I can tell you about the Israeli method for combat, and now I'm talking about whether I'm using my hands or a knife or an F-16,
right?
it you can sum up the Israeli combat methodology by this: it is an irreverent system.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, man, I like martial arts.
Yeah.
I've done a bunch of different martial arts.
Yeah.
So Krav Maga is often talked about as like, Krav Maga is the Israeli system of hand-to-hand combat, and it's pretty rough, and it's a martial art, and
Right.
man, Krav Maga is not a martial art.
Right.
It is a combat system, just like, and people make mistakes by trying to separate
Categorize it.
hand-to-hand combat from weapon combat.
Right.
All of it is the same. You just have a different tool right now. So now, what do I mean by an irreverent system? Why is Krav Maga not a martial art? Because martial arts have a whole tradition behind them.
Boundaries, tradition.
It's very nice. Those are nice things. There's breathing techniques. There's almost like a religious aspect to many martial arts.
Right.
Dude, Krav Maga has none of that.
Right.
The Israeli method of shooting is also not a martial art. Everything we do is irreverent. We have no basis on tradition. We found everything on what works. And you know what? If it works better, then we're going to do that.
Right.
And that's the Israeli system. And if you can show me that something works better than what I'm doing, that's the way I want to do it, man, because I'm going to go on my next mission soon. When they call me, I'm going out there. And if I don't do it as best as I can, I might die.
Right.
And my men might die next to me.
Right.
And so everything is based on what works really.
Right.
Not theory.
Right.
Not tradition. What, you think I care about tradition when my ass is on the line?
Right. No, not at all.
No, man, I care about what's going to work.
Not at all. So and you don't overemphasize the precious, half a second, quarter second, whatever it may take you to get the gun live versus having it hot and ready to go, depending on the environment you're in.
So again, it depends on the environment. It depends on the situation.
Yeah.
If that half a second if the potential for me, so now I'm walking with my gun and I've got a bullet in the chamber and I'm in the grocery store and I know that I'm walking around my whole life saving this half a second.
Right.
Quarter of a second.
Right.
Which, by the way, most people who carry with a bullet in the chamber cannot get their gun on target and put a bullet into the target within 1.2 seconds.
Right.
So if they can't, I don't even know why we're having the conversation. But let's just say that they're at that level and they can do it so the guys who carry with a bullet in the chamber, you should be able to get it out at like 0.9, maybe 0.7, your first bullet out from a concealed position, right?
Right.
So you do save time. So if I have that amount of time, and that's a tool that I've got in my hand, but I am losing a safety aspect, now I have to balance and say, what's the cost benefit here?
Right.
Right? If I'm in the grocery store, by losing the safety aspect, I may actually be losing more than what that quarter of a second is worth.
Right.
But if I'm in Afghanistan, then by having that extra quarter of a second, I may be gaining a whole lot more than what the safety is worth.
Yeah. Especially
Does
if
that make sense?
You're going into a war zone or you've got to clear some building where there's some known terrorist threat.
Sure, man.
Changes things dramatically.
Yeah,
right?
I want that quarter of a second on my side. Yeah. But if I'm having dinner at the local pizza shop, then like I'd be crazy to have a bullet in the chamber to just standard, like to give up that level of safety. Why would I do that?
Right. And I've said this before, like I don't care so much if people carry with a bullet in the chamber. I think some people shouldn't, and I think carrying without a bullet in the chamber is something that people should more seriously consider instead of just writing off.
Yeah.
But my big beef is, when the subject comes up, people act like you're an idiot, you aren't competent to carry a firearm, and all of those things. And what I'm trying to get the message out there is like, look, there's more thought and there's more intelligence behind this system than what the people who are against it are giving it credit for. This is a very incredibly well thought out system, and it's a very highly effective system. And I'm not putting myself in more danger by carrying this way. I actually feel like I'm putting myself in less danger. And if there is a threat to my life, I don't feel like, it's the equivalent of me not carrying a gun.
Right.
when I need a gun. It's certainly not.
No, that quarter of a second does not equate to you now have no way to protect yourself.
Right.
Now, what I would say is, anybody who, whether you question the system or not, I think that it would be silly to say that it's not a viable system.
Yeah.
It's there. It works. We use it. It is a viable system. I don't poo-poo the American system. I don't poo-poo the British system. I think that there are many viable systems, and it's important to think carefully about all these systems.
Yep.
And some of them are really good for one thing and not as good for another thing,
Right.
and that's fine too.
Right.
What I would tell people is, man, take a class.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you're an adult. You decide what you want to do, and that's fine. And I'm not here to tell anybody, like, no, you should do it like this.
Right.
Because that's the way to do it.
Right.
And there is no, that's the way to do it.
Well, that's the attitude that bothers me so much. Is
that's just silly, though.
It's arrogant elitism, and often it's based on ignorance. But you mentioned train. Well, one great way to train is to, if you're in the Atlanta area, or if you want Ariel to, come to wherever you are and do some training with you. He's an amazing instructor. He's very, as you can tell in the podcast, very articulate, very good at presenting the system in a logical manner, and building your confidence in the system and with your firearm. You have some training courses coming up in Atlanta too, right?
Yeah, we got one. We got a one-day pistol course and then a 2-day rifle course. So December 27th, 28th, and 29th.
December 27th, 28th, 29th.
And if that's just around the corner, so we have things kind of popping up here and there, and most of what we do is with specialized law enforcement units, SWAT teams and such.
Right.
By the way, they certainly see value in the system. So
yes, yeah.
So
and I think they're starting to see it more and more after training with you guys, right?
Absolutely.
You meet the initial resistance, you break through.
Yeah, and also just I don't. A lot of times people will tell me, like, oh, you're working with cops. Oh, my God, they're going to be really hard to work with. They're going to be arrogant and jerk. Man, I've had great experiences with the police community here, and they've been super respectful, and I've been super respectful to them. And, and sometimes there's things that we come up against and we see differently, but it's been, man, two professional people sit across from each other over beers, and we talk about what we do differently, and the principles are almost always the same.
Yeah.
So so those are important conversations, and I don't get. I laugh off when I hear somebody say, like, "Oh yeah, you don't know what you're talking about." I'm like, okay,
right,
no problem, man.
Yeah, your ego doesn't.
I guess I don't
fight that, right? That's great. So, Ariel mentioned the training sessions earlier. This podcast may not be released before those, so I'm going to apologize. But how can people get in touch with you if they want? So you do a lot of work with military and police, but you also do consulting for schools and companies about security issues they have, maybe reducing the risk of having an active killer in their organization.
We do really in-depth risk assessments. We do all kinds of counter surveillance stuff, and pretty much high-level specialized needs that people have in the physical security side. And even we have an amazing investigator, and she's beautiful. And
yeah, well, that's you're talking about.
So.
He's referencing beautiful because it's his girlfriend, fiance. Oh well,
she's my woman. She's my
woman. All right, we'll leave it at that. But she's awesome. She's one of the most badass chicks you'll ever meet.
Yeah, man.
She's cool to the point, very direct. So,
we do a lot of specialized stuff in the security field, right. And our clientele and the reason I'm not gonna go walk down every avenue of the kinds of things that we offer, but man, we have. Corporate clients, we have law enforcement clients, we work with militaries around the world, we help even NGOs in really austere environments. We do a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa.
Some people won't know what an NGO is, but that's...
So a nonprofit organization...
Oh, NPO.
NGO is a non-governmental organization.
Non-governmental organization, okay.
But they're like the people who are trying to be nice out in the... At least that's what they say. They're trying to be nice.
Right.
Give shoes to the people who don't have shoes out in the middle of the jungle.
So you're consulting them.
So we're helping them not get eaten.
Yeah.
And,
so basically, if you're a business that's concerned about security, if you're
we do a lot of training
any
for
type
them.
of organization, a school, a business, a college, a university.
Yep.
You're concerned about maybe security. You want a security analysis of your of your organization. Reach out to Ariel. If you are somebody who carries concealed, reach out to them as well about maybe some upcoming courses, particularly if you're in the Atlanta area. That's where he lives, and that's where Draco Group is based out of.
Yeah, I think that's the first time we said the name of the company.
Yeah,
the company's
we
called
should have
Draco
started
Group.
with that.
Sorry.
Celia is not going to be happy about that part. But so Draco Group. So how do they contact you directly or Draco Group directly?
Yeah, so you can obviously check out our website. It's www.dracogroup.com. That's DRACO and then group GROUP.com. My email address is Ariel ARIEL at thedracogroup.com. And I'm available by cell phone too anytime somebody even wants to tell me I'm nuts for carrying without a bullet in the chamber.
Let's not get your cell phone number out there right now. But you can, social media might be an easy way
Facebook
too.
Also, we're on
Ariel Siegelman. Just Google it. His name will pop up.
Yeah.
He looks like a freaking wolf in his little like furry hoodie, and it's a really cool picture. So you won't miss him that way. But yeah, look him up on Facebook. You can message him there as well. He also has a LinkedIn account, but if you Google Ariel Siegelman, all that information will pop up. Well, man.
And like our page on Facebook, man. Draco Group page. Yes,
Draco Group page. Absolutely. 100%. And, of course, like 4D Combatives on Facebook as well. And, man, I'd really like to thank you for coming out.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Over the last few years, I consider you a good friend and as well as a mentor. I really appreciate you coming out and love the work that you're doing. And I think it's important that we kind of start to get this this message across to the U.S. public, just to let them know that there's an alternative. Because there's a lot of people that I talk to, like take away like some of the irrational, guys online that make comments. But there's a lot of people I talk to who are like, oh, that makes me so much more comfortable carrying a weapon for the same reasons that I thought at first, having kids and all those other things. So I want to thank you for the work that you do and kind of bringing this methodology to the U.S. And man, it's been a good year and a half or so since we've known each other.
Yeah, cool.
All right.
Yeah, and I think bottom line is it's just about continued communication and continued thought process. Yep. And I think that especially in this world of guns, there's a lot of people with big egos, and you can't let somebody who's like, oh, that's just, write it off altogether.
Right.
Don't walk down that road, man. You'll never learn anything.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And
absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you have any comments or questions, ask below. And don't forget to check out our sponsors.